Hey guys, welcome back. Today we'll be talking something related to the motorsports. In motorsports world, the pressure gradient in a tire is dependent on the temperature of the tire. So how this works actually, we'll understand that today in this video. When we talk about motorsports, the tires are basically divided into three parts: the outer part of the tire, the middle, and the inner part of the tire. So every individual tire is divided into these three parts, and the temperature of every part is measured. For example, let's say this is the front left tire. So every part of this tire is mounted with a temperature sensor. Here this outer region has one sensor, this middle region also has a sensor, and so does the inner part of the tire. So by measuring the temperature of these three parts and comparing them, we can get the pressure gradient. So obviously there's a formula for that, and the formula is the average of the temperature of the inner and the outer region minus the temperature of the middle region. That is T inner plus T outer divided by 2, whole thing minus temperature of the middle section of the tire. Quite simple. So now, how can we determine the pressure gradient by this formula? So the thing is, if we get a positive value from this formula, that means the pressure gradient in the tire is more, and hence we need to release some amount of air pressure. Before I move on, let me make one thing clear. It is tried, efforts are made to bring this pressure gradient to zero. So if the pressure gradient is zero, the tire is said to be in optimum state. So if it's positive, the pressure gradient is way more than required, and hence some amount of air is released. In the same way, if the pressure gradient is negative, then the tire is filled with some amount of air and the pressure is increased and tried to bring the value of pressure gradient to zero. So let's take an example of this. Let us say we have a vehicle that is run for like 4 test laps, and we have this data over here from those laps. So there is this individual data for each and every individual tire. That's the front left, the front right, the rear left, and the rear right. So let's have a look at the data from the front left tire. So as we can see, in all the 4 laps, the data is very much into negative. That means the pressure gradient in the tire is less, and hence we need to fill the tire with more air pressure. Similarly, the same holds for the front right tire. But the difference between the front left and the front right tire is, here in the front left we need more air, and this value cannot be neglected. Hence, steps should be taken and air should be filled in the front left tire, because the value is way more in the negative. The pressure gradient is too much of negative. Whereas in the front right tire, these values can be counted and can be taken into consideration. There won't be a major problem if air is not filled in this tire. Well, we can say that the pressure gradient is okay when the value lies between -5 till 5. So let's say the pressure gradient we have is in negative value. So if it's between 0 and -5, that can be counted as okay. But it is still recommended that the pressure gradient is equals to 0 or nearly equals to 0. And the same holds for the positive side also. Here for the rear left tire, we have these values: 5.1, 4.4, 2.01 and 5.7. These values sound okay, but still they cannot be taken into consideration. Why? We'll get back there later. And the rear right tire. Now here we have 3.2, 3.07, 4.12, 4.83. So basically these values lie between 0 and 5 on the positive side. Yeah, that we can take these values into consideration, and it will be okay if no air is removed from this tire, and among these all the four tires the performance will be the best from the rear right tire. Now coming to rear left tire, here we can see there's a lot of variation, and by variation I mean that for example, here in the first lap we have this pressure gradient like 5.1, and then on the third lap we have this 2.01, and hence we can imagine how the variation is and how huge this difference is. Once again, we'll consider this tire. Let us not see these values and understand the pressure gradient that is taking place in the tire. So let's say this is the outer part, this is the middle, and this is the inner part. Okay. So what happens is pressure gradient. The basic meaning of pressure gradient is how the rate of pressure changes from one point to another. So let's say from inner to medium from inner side to the middle section, and from the middle section to the outer side. And if this change is not constant, obviously there will be a damage that will be happening to the tire while it rolls on the ground surface. So as the temperature, yeah, of course we are taking all considering all these terms with relation to temperature. So as the temperature distribution is not that if that rate is not that good, the pressure gradient is also not constant, as we can see from the data. So what will happen is it will result the tires into graining. So now what basically is graining? If you are a Formula One fan and if you have ever watched the race, you'll see that at the end of the race, part of the tire has some bits of the residue of the tire stuck on top of it, while some part of the tire is like okay, it seems okay and it looks good, but the other part looks very damaged, and there are many grains of tires that are stuck upon it. So basically this is graining. Now graining can happen due to, like I said, this variation, this huge variation in pressure gradient, and also if the tires are very cold, the temperature of the tire is quite cold. Because of that too, this graining can happen. So coming back to our data over here, like I said, the big variation, it's not cannot be counted and cannot be said as okay. So hence, still steps should be taken over here with the rear left tire. And among these tires, yeah, this tire has the best performance when we compare it to the other ones. This topic was a bit tricky to understand, a little bit complicated, but basically it's all about how pressure gradient is related to the temperature of the inner section, middle section, and the outer section, the three section of the tire. And all this data is very calculated on the real time when we talk about motorsports, and this is how it works. So thank you for watching this video, and see you in the next one.